Why are some people okay calling something emotional smothering, but not okay calling it emotional incest? Let's explore this on today's Ask a Shrink. It's interesting for me as a therapist doing mental health videos on emotional incest the last couple of years that sometimes in the comments section people don't want to hear the term emotional incest. Can't you call it something else? Isn't there another name for it? Well, let's look at why that's uncomfortable for some people to call something, to name it as emotional incest. Just the fact that this question is sometimes raised and people express an icky feeling around the term emotional incest lets you know that it needs to be talked about more and more and more. It's uncomfortable for some people because they really don't want to acknowledge the truth of what it's all about. Maybe they've witnessed emotional incest in their own family, or they're a victim of emotional incest. Or they have a friend or loved one who was taken over in this way emotionally and they know what it's all about. So now they watch a video or they read a book about it and it's like, don't call it that. Isn't there another name for it? Well, no, there's not. And we definitely don't want to use another name that may dumb it down, water it down, make it seem like, oh, it's not so significant after all. It's very significant. It's a form of abuse. A child is being taken over at an early age without them having any say in the matter to be the mini husband or mini wife for one of their parents. That's not a good thing. So a lot of people automatically think of physical incest, and that probably has a lot to do with why people get the willies about the term emotional incest. And that makes sense. So when people get hung up on the term incest, they're usually thinking of physical incest. But when we look at the Merriam-Webster definition of incestuous, for example, then we can see how it applies to a child being emotionally taken over. In fact, let's have a look at that right now. One of the definitions of incestuous is excessively or improperly intimate or exclusive. So we know when a child is emotionally taken over, it is excessively and improperly intimate and or exclusive with the perpetrating parent. And with emotional incest, it is a bit more insidious in a way than physical incest, because at least with physical incest, a child who's a victim of this can at least point to something physically, to a teacher, to a trusted loved one, to a counselor, point to a bruised vagina, point to physical signs around the rectum that do indicate that there's been some sort of sexual violation. With emotional incest, there may be nothing necessarily to point to at all. It's usually the child's word against the world. Help, I'm being loved too much. Most people don't want to hear that and they don't want to believe it, and they minimize it and say, oh, your mother's so good to you. Your father's just wonderful to you. How can you complain about this? Because that's how it appears to the outside world. The child is trying to communicate in the best ways they can, perhaps, that they've been turned into a bit of a slave. They're being trapped. Their identity is being stripped away because they're there to worship and please their parent, so to speak. This happens quite often from a narcissistic parent. And of course, one of the definitions to be a narcissist is it's all about me. And a parent who is able to take over one of their children emotionally is clearly making it about me. It's about their needs, what they want, how they want to feel better in the world. They want immediate gratification. The term incestuous, of course, applies to emotional smothering, just as I mentioned. But Merriam-Webster also mentioned that it applies to the example of mainstream fashion magazines have an incestuous relationship with advertisers, and that undermines integrity. So we see how it can also be used in the business world, for example. So because something, in this case a term, makes some people feel uncomfortable, we don't want to run from that. We don't want to sugarcoat things or make it be glossy or appear to be less than what it really is. Emotional incest is childhood trauma for that child who has to endure that. And with a traumatic childhood that they will bring into adulthood, they're going to probably and possibly suffer many disorders related to anxiety, depression, identity issues, self-esteem issues, problems in primary relationships, and on and on and on. We don't want to somehow make that look pretty. We want to call it out for what it is. The saying, let's call a spade, really applies here. Also, sometimes people will email me or write in the comments, can you please do a specific video about mother-daughter or sibling-to-sibling emotional incest? And even though I may not do videos about each specific way this can play out, I will say all the dynamics apply to any situation where somebody's being taken over emotionally to please another person's needs. So it can apply to what I just mentioned or any close adult caregiver, a close relationship with teachers, mentors, for foster kids with their foster parents. A teacher has a lot of power, and if they're relying on one of their students developing a close relationship where they're expecting this student to ease somehow some of their emotional needs, and that child, out of feeling a sense of duty or fear or being trained to be a people pleaser, may just capitulate to this. The teacher gets away with it, and now that child has been taken over and will pay an emotional price for this growing up. In this case, it would affect trust, wouldn't it? A child is there to learn with a teacher. The teacher is molding them into how to be an adult, teaching them hopefully to be a scholar, to learn, setting them up for their path in life in terms of a possible career, where they're headed, their future. And now that child is learning, what adults can I really trust here? My own teacher has been using me, confusing me, making me play some sort of sick role. So we can see whether it's a parent or other people, such as teachers, the damage is all the same. So yes, while the term incest brings up feelings in people, strong feelings about inbreeding, let's say, for example, because they're thinking of physical incest, we need to get used to the term in terms of thinking about it emotionally as well. There is such a thing as emotional incest. If it triggers you and you don't like that term, ask yourself what that's about. Why am I so triggered by a term that is actually applicable to what's happening to these innocent children? A lot to think about here. Hopefully this is helpful to some of you in wondering broadly the umbrella term of what it means to be a victim of emotional incest and why this term is appropriate. So please leave me some comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Please subscribe to my mental health YouTube channel if you like these kind of videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.